I am Lisa Radcliffe. I am the co-founder and CEO, or co-founder. I'm the founder and CEO of Pumpkin Fuss. I can be the co-founder for today. I'm sitting in for Shanique Ruiz, and Shanique is fine. I wanted to specifically do today's session because we're talking about early intervention, and it is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I hope you will all forgive me for taking over today. But I'm looking forward to it. And Shanique will be back next week with Camille Crayton, who is another occupational therapist. We're speaking to occupational therapists for its OT month in April. And thank you all. OTs are near and dear to our heart. But before I continue, I would like to take a moment to thank all of the essential workers out there who are keeping us safe and healthy on the front lines, from our healthcare workers to our postal workers, to our grocery workers, to our emergency services workers. We appreciate you a great deal, and thank you for allowing the rest of us to stay safe and healthy at home. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about early intervention today with two occupational therapists and their dogs, and we will actually take questions during, so feel free while you are watching. If something comes up that you want to ask about, we will get to all of those questions. Please be advised there's a lag of about 20 seconds, and we also have a notice up from the live streaming service that we're using that there are some performance issues because so many of us are doing the same thing right now from home. So today we're talking with Alex Dantec and Meg Kobielski, and we're talking about the value of early intervention and how it can be used to change your child's future. And we're going to be talking about the book that they've written and that is available to parents. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Alex. If you could just tell us who you are and what you do, that would be terrific.
Yep. So my name is Alex Dantec. I've been an OT for almost 11 years now, and I worked with ages birth to 103 years old in the spectrum since I've been doing this. So I've seen a lot in my years. I specialize mostly in autism and behavior management and neurotypical kiddos now as I've gotten farther into my field.
And Meg?
So I'm Meagan Kobielski. I've been an OT now for just about 7 years. I have worked with children and adults of all ages as well, but I've kind of focused really on the pre-K, K through 2 age children. I work mainly with children with special needs that carry diagnosis of autism, intellectual disability, and physical disabilities as I've gotten further into it as well. That's where I found that I fit the best. That's what it is.
Cool, thank you. I want to just make a note to everyone out there that we will have an ASL interpreted version of this whole conversation available in a couple of days on our Facebook page. So please check back or refer other people to that if that would be helpful for them to be able to access this content. So I'd like to start by asking you, tell us what is early intervention? Why is it important for children, and what ages does it cover? And Meg, if you wanted to start, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So the age range that, where I know at least in New York and other states I lived in, it's birth to 3. It's usually covered by the county that a child lives in, where they can get services. And to get services, kids can or parents can ask for a doctor's script at their appointment, at their visits, and request an OT, PT, or speech evaluation. I feel like it's super important. A lot of times kids get flagged for services later, which is what we typically see. We see the kids there later on, but the earlier you can start working on the skill, the better it is. Whether even if you might think it's something small, just get them the help now. And maybe by the time they go to school or go to preschool, they'll have learned and might not even need services anymore.
It's really interesting that you say that. I have 2 children. Many people who are watching this probably know I have 2 children with adaptive needs that are 13 years apart in age. And I didn't know about early intervention. The sound is coming back through now. So I'm just going to wait until we get confirmation that we can be heard.
And maybe backtrack a little bit just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they stopped hearing us.
Yeah.
I'm going to start from your book because
Okay.
that's, so important. I think that's just like, I can't even tell you how much I've really enjoyed reading it. All right. I'm not getting any information from them yet.
My mom even messaged me. She's like, we can't hear you.
Oh no. If you guys, you should be able to hear us. If you can hear us now, let us know.
There we go.
All right, we're back.
All right, we'll start again. So where I'm going to start is actually with what I think is the most important piece of this, which is your book. So we're going to backtrack a little bit for all of you that have just rejoined us. I apologize for the sound issues. We did receive a notification at the start of this that they're having some performance issues because so many people are using live streaming right now. We're talking with Alex Dantec and Meg Kobielski about a book that they wrote that's really, I think, important to get into the hands of parents as early as possible about the milestone checklist that parents should be aware of. As a parent who actually had a 26-weeker who was finally referred to early intervention after 13 months, I really appreciate the information that I didn't know that's in this book about what your child should be doing, at 2 months, at 6 months, at 9 months. If I had had this kind of information, number one, I would have gotten my child's services sooner. And number two, it would have given me a better sense of confidence as a parent as to what I should be seeing. And so the fact that my 26-weeker did not have any language skills at a year, did not turn when I called him, did not point to things he wanted, I would have been a lot more aware. We were so worried about just keeping him healthy and keeping him out of the hospital that the milestone stuff and the developmental milestones he should have been reaching were really beyond me at that point. And having something like this would have made a difference in my life. So with that said, I'd like to go back and ask, we'll start again with Alex, just if you could talk for a moment about why you wrote this book and what you were trying to bring to parents by writing this book.
Yep. So as I said before, everyone can hear me. So we really wanted to bring something to parents that was super easy for them to be able to just go through and hit the 4 main areas that we are testing generally, or that we'll refer out for testing. So speech, feeding, fine motor, and gross motor. Oftentimes parents are looking for their kids to talk and walk. So those are kind of like the things people are always looking for directly, but there are so many other things that feed into those skills and that tie together, like feeding and speech, or visual motor and fine motor, or gross motor and visual motor skills, and reflexes. So these things all tie together, but most times my kid isn't talking, my kid isn't walking, but oftentimes there's so many other things that tie into that. So we really wanted to get something to parents that was really easy to check off, go mark when they hit it, and then just be able to identify things that were missing that were kind of key components, because we were seeing a lot of kids in the young kindergarten preschool age that parents were looking at us like, what do you mean they're supposed to be doing XYZ? Because they didn't realize that their kids were expected to be doing those things at that age because they'd never been told. And we find that a lot of times doctors are in such a rush and don't spend a whole lot of time with the child if it's a well visit, that they don't really pick up on these things along the way. And if parents don't know to say, my kid is not XYZ, they never know that there's a lack there, that there's some sort of lagging window. So we see these things later, and then parents look at us like, there's no way my kid should be doing that. And I'm like, I can show you the manual where because that they need that confirmation to know, like, I'm sorry, but this is kind of where we are. And we were facing that a lot. And it was hard for us to be that person, to be, it's hard to tell a parent that, and to have that response consistently. So we were trying to bridge that gap a little bit for parents and make it easier for something in one place that was small enough to like drop in a baby bag and bring with you to the doctor. That's the point of it. To make it easy, clear, and concise. We changed all the language out, so it was super simple. And was our hope along the way.
Yeah, because a lot of doctors will ask parents, like, is your child talking? And they're like, yes, but not say, like, well, are they saying 50 words? You know, like the parents might not know what the actual expectation is. So that was one of the reasons why, too.
I really appreciate that, because you said, like in the book, you said when they should have 2 words, you know, at what moment they should have 2 words, or the fact that you also put down, you know, write down the date at which they started to do something. Because I got asked that repeatedly, and I was like, you know, I don't know. Hi to your dog.
Yeah, it's mine.
No, it's fine. We decided at the start, for everyone, just so you all know, we all have dogs, so it's people and dogs, depending on. Oh, and I just got a notice that I should be putting up your names, which would be very helpful. I'm sorry about that. This is my first time doing this, you can tell. So anyway, one of the things that for me, I'm sorry. One of the things for me that didn't happen was because my son was a preemie, we were actually going to a preemie clinic. We weren't having the same sort of doctor visits that I think, you know, we regularly would have done with a pediatrician. At the preemie clinic, they really very much looked at, like I said, keeping the child out of the hospital. So rehospitalization, we were told, was the biggest risk to developmental changes, you know, to his future development. But because of that, we really missed all of those milestones. And what I didn't know until later was, if they miss some of those milestones, they don't go back and make them up. Like you've talked about the importance of crawling or chewing. I found out that because he didn't chew when he was supposed to chew, because he had been intubated and he'd had so many tubes in his throat, he didn't want anything in his mouth. He didn't chew. We had to actually get a feeding therapist to teach him how to chew so that he could actually have solid foods. I mean, what are some of the things, I know you've mentioned to me before, but can you talk about some of the things that you see that are missing when a child doesn't get early intervention? What sorts of challenges do you notice developmentally later on when you do see them at school age that lets you know, this is a kid that should have gotten EI and didn't?
Usually one of the biggest things is like as far as like school age kids are concerned, definitely visual skills that they can, because a lot of kids, we can peg quick if a kid skipped crawling. So when you skip crawling, you'll often see some kids have like winging of their, so back here at your scapula, so you'll see winging there, so they won't have really good shoulder stability from crawling, and then that could lead to hand weakness if they're writing and holding a pencil. So we'll see difficulty with that. We'll see difficulty with the visual skills, which is more of Alex's domain there. But like skipping one thing like that might not seem like a big deal, but it leads to a lot of things later on. I know she has more information on it.
And sometimes what happens is it's not necessarily like I think missing EI or missing is not necessarily not getting EI, but it's not knowing what you're missing, right? It's kind of like that kids who needed EI services and didn't get them, like you said, we can't go back for every kid and reconfigure everything they did, because now it's a motor pattern. So unless it's detrimentally affecting them and having to reroute those motor patterns, we're not going to do that. We're going to use the motor pattern they've got and adapt and work with it. So oftentimes that's really the fallout we find, is that we are just working with what we got, as opposed to something that could have been fixed a long time ago. And I mean, and this goes all the way up to, we see kids who are like 6, 7, and 8 who are still having a lot of maladaptive skills because they were never addressed prior to that. And then you just have to go with it. It's just like adults, you know, we adapt faulty motor patterns, and then we just got to kind of adapt and roll with it, you know. And it's kind of works
too as an adult.
Yeah.
It's hard to change those things. So the sooner you can work on it, honestly, the better it will be for your child.
And I've got a question about that. There's this, it's not one and done either, which is something that I've learned over time. So for example, every time Buster has a growth spurt, he's back on his toes. He's a toe walker. He has mild CP. I mean, it's really interesting to me that, wow, we have to constantly reinforce certain motor patterns, good behavior. So we always tell them, walk on your heels, walk on your heels, walk on your heels. But do you see that as well? Like that there are things that even if you address them once, it's not always one and done. This is an ongoing requirement for children.
It depends upon the root cause of the skill. If you can, there are some skills I can correct right from their core, right? If it's a visual skill that we can correct and readjust, then the other skills kind of roll behind it. But with toe walking, generally speaking, especially when there's a motor neurological diagnosis behind it, you are going to experience those recoils. So, and then you wind up with tight calves and they're not moving the same way. And then all these things kind of go hand in hand, right? So a lot of it depends on the root cause of why we're seeing the deficit. And then it's the first thing I taught Meg when I was like, look for the why, always look for the why. Like that's the first thing you have to go back to, because it's not an accident per se. The way that a child presents is not an accident. There's a reason for it. And you have to find the why.
It's really funny you should say that, because you said something a moment ago that, again, back to Buster, but so his scapulas stick out. And I had always thought it was because he had heart surgery when he was 11 days old. And instead, maybe some of it is because he didn't crawl too. I mean, it's an interesting thing that I'm learning something all the time through this. And I think that's the other thing, back to your book, is there's so much, it's so rich in information about what we can do as parents. You've got a whole checklist of what you can do that's an age-appropriate activity for that particular developmental milestone that the child should be working on at that time. Again, and I don't know whether this was while we were not being heard, but tummy time. Not just that they need it, which no one ever told me, but that they're not going to like it. Yeah, and that you have to be prepared. Say that again, Meg, I'm sorry.
In our book, I wrote it in all capital letters.
Yes, you did. You did. Is that something, so Buster didn't do it. Is this something, tell me what tummy time does, and tell me what parents should be prepared for when they try it with their kid.
So it does a whole lot. So especially when, we wrote, some time is better than no time. And we know that it will cause them to cry, and it might be uncomfortable at first, but in that time when your baby is so new, they're so used to being curled up in this one pattern. And by putting them on their bellies, what it does is it helps work on elongating the muscles and kind of waking them up in the back of their neck. That way they can start to lift and then turn their head side to side. And then once they're there, you can put toys in front of them to make it more fun, sing, sound as crazy as you want. You're home. It doesn't matter. Just put stuff in front of them that it might be motivating, like a mirror or something. And once they are able to turn their heads and move this part of their body better, the back of their neck, then you'll start to see them activate the muscles in their back. So it kind of progresses backwards, and eventually they'll be able to hold themselves on a quadruped or that type of stance. So everything kind of ties together. It's a lot to explain, but
no, that's really cool. And it's the first time I'm hearing this information. And so I think the more we can share this kind of information, the more we as parents can help our kids. One of the things we had discussed, we've discussed previously a little bit, is the difference in the way girls and boys hit those milestones. And Alex, I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about, what do you see as the difference between girls and boys, and how does that play out then in what they do or don't get for services?
So there's a general understanding that boys develop certain skills ahead of girls, and that girls develop certain skills ahead of boys. Girls, generally speaking, are supposedly develop facial recognition and emotional skills quicker. And it's also why girls are usually misdiagnosed autism when they have it and they're diagnosed incorrectly. And then boys are very spatially, they're known to be very visually spatially strong, which is why there is a very large misconception that there's so many mathematicians and architects who are males, because their spatial relationships tend to be stronger from an earlier age. A lot of that is because there is I don't want to say a prejudice, but there is, with parents, girls and boys get trucks, cars, puzzles, things that are building put together. Girls don't get those things frequently. So they're not building those skills as strong from a young age. And then what happens is we see kids who are being brought in, who, especially boys, we get this a lot with boys, like they're like 2 and still missing like 6 months worth of skills. They'll catch up. Don't worry. We get that a lot from the doctors. Oh, well, they'll catch up. Like, that's not really a thing. You know, a couple months is expected, like 2-3 months are like, for you, someone with a preemie, the adjusted age is going to change the milestones, but not in the norm. If you're having a typical pregnancy and then, you know, you have milestones that are lagging by 6 months, then it's not a they're going to catch up situation. And that actually happened with my family. One of my younger cousins, who's in his early 20s now, but when he was very young, he was not talking by the time he was 2. And the doctor kept telling my aunt, like, he'll catch up. And my grandmother, who had 5 kids, was like, no, take him to a doctor now and get him a referral. And sure enough, he wound up with speech and OT for many years, and until he wound up in school and then was diagnosed later as what we would call Asperger's. But like, this was where we were, and it's innately what happens. And we see that a lot with doctors. And I think, you know, we defer to doctors a lot, but there's something to be said for what we know and what we know we're looking for in our kids. And I think that's the beauty of the checklist, is that we can give the parents the opportunity to say they are missing, like, all of these things are not happening. And yes, I know, like, they'll catch up at some point, but like, I want some help, you know, and like, they have to be provided that if they ask for it. So,
you know, it's specifically talking about the language delay piece. I had a neighbor who came to me, her son wasn't, similar to Buster, you know, had no language, was not speaking at all, and was probably 1.5 years, not babbling, nothing. And I suggested to her that she have him evaluated, you know, just so she would know, because that was her opinion, was, hey, he'll catch up. He's just he's late in developing this skill. He'll catch up. And I said to her, why don't you just have him evaluated? Then you'll know whether or not this is something you need to be concerned about or not. And her concern at the time was that her son would be labeled. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I hear that a lot with parents. I hear a lot of parents who are concerned about getting services for their kids because of the stigma that they think will go along with it. And as a parent who's had 2 children with IEPs, with adaptive needs, with special education supports, I got to tell you, get services early, get them often. I mean, it's something I feel very strongly about, which is why I wanted to be able to talk to you all. But I still hear a lot of parents that are reluctant. And Meg, maybe do you how do you speak to a parent, or what would you say to a parent who is concerned about reaching out for services?
So oftentimes I'd see that too. Like, I don't want my child to have X label, and I just encourage them. It's really great to even get all of these evaluations. It's just a baseline. Even if you don't think there is something going on, just get them done. It usually doesn't cost you anything other than your time. And that way you'll know. And if there is something that can be worked on, they can start working on it early. I just have one example of a boy that sticks out to me. I started seeing him at preschool age, and his daycare provider picked up on something going on just with how he was writing. And he started CPSC, which is preschool services. And by the time he was able to graduate with me and go into kindergarten with no label. So the label that they're worried about might not even carry over. And if they do have one, your child doesn't really know what a label is. It's more, I feel like it's more of us as adults, like, worried about other people's perceptions. And I just think if it's going to get your child that help, why not do it? And maybe that label will just get them the services that they need, whether you think it's accurate or not. Because I've even had people at school, people come to me all the time, and I work at a school for children with special needs. And like, I've had teachers and paraprofessionals say, my grandbaby, he got an autism diagnosis, and I don't agree with it. I don't think that the psychologist was right. And I just say, okay, I said, I don't know your child, but like, did they recommend services? Yes, he's getting speech, he's getting OT, he's getting PT now, and he's doing great. And I'm like, well, that's good. I said, well, maybe sometimes, even if you don't like what the diagnosis that the psychologist came up with, at least he's still getting the help that he needs now, and he can get reevaluated, and then maybe he might not need it anymore. So it's still beneficial.
And that happens later in life too. It's not just early intervention. We still have kids who are not diagnosed because parents don't want the diagnosis. When we have, so that's the difference in school age versus the early intervention though, right? In the school age, we can give them an eligibility classification without a doctor's diagnosis. It's just based on our evaluations. But we do have a lot of them that as a team, we're like, really needs the support and a diagnosis if possible. And parents don't want the label, not realizing that sometimes the label opens a lot of doors for services. And, whether you call them the label or not, or who uses it, it's kind of irrelevant. And I had a very long conversation about ADHD with a mom who has twins with ADHD. And I said, look, you can get them diagnosed and get a diagnosis and not tell anyone. I said, but then you have it. And if you need anything, you have that for you, and at least someone to give you some pointers and tips, information, anything. And that's what I try and just impart to parents. Like, the evaluation only goes as far as you bring it. Right. So
it's really, it's interesting you say that, because Buster got services 5 days a week. So he got OT, PT, speech and language, feeding, and a SEAT. And so we had people that were in our house every day. He was at risk, so we weren't allowed to take him like to a sensory gym or something, but he got significant services, and he was slowly sort of weaned off them as his situation improved. And now he actually doesn't receive special therapeutic services at all. There are still things that we do with him, excuse me, so that he can keep up certain skill sets. But it's really interesting, exactly what you're saying, which is, I think, my opinion is, by making those services available to him often and early, we were able to change the long-term outcome. And so at this point, he really doesn't need any of those adaptive services. And unless I tell someone what it is, or those therapeutic services, unless I tell someone, oh yeah, Buster was a 26-weeker, if I didn't tell you, or you didn't see him run, you probably wouldn't know anything about his diagnosis. Like if you guys sat with him as OTs, you would, but it's fascinating to me because he would not be where he is today. There's no question in my mind. He would not be anywhere close to where he is today if he had not gotten early intervention. And because he got early intervention, you don't know he did.
Right.
So,
and I think the label is kind of secondary. No one knows what the label is unless you tell them. Go about your world, and people will accept you or not accept you regardless of label. So it happens all the time. So I think the label is kind of irrelevant, in the long, if you don't tell anyone. It's yours to tell as you get older, and that came out with my cousin also. He told the friends he chose to tell, and he didn't tell the ones he didn't. And that was it,
Agreed. And I do understand, and I don't want to be insensitive too. I noticed that Maddie made a comment about being labeled was hard on her. So that's my older child. And I can fully respect the fact that for some people, they feel like they carry those labels then, and they're treated in a way dependent upon those labels. But specifically with early intervention, it really seems like it's so early that it really doesn't carry with that child for the rest of their life. And you really do have the opportunity to change the future, as we said in the title of this. So let me go back one more question, because I don't want to run out of time. And if anybody has any questions that they'd like to add, please feel free to type them in, and we'd be happy to answer any of them that we can. What would you tell parents now? So I know you talked before about, if they're a couple of months delayed, it's something you can catch up with. But if it's really, if you've waited a year or two, then it gets much harder to break some of these patterns. What would you tell parents now who are concerned that in the middle of this epidemic, we can't really get the kinds of support and services that our children might need? And Meg, do you want to start?
I'm thinking, because I've overnight become an overnight teletherapist. So, and we've all just been kind of like helping each other as therapists is concerned. And I know a lot of parents are in a lot of support groups. So I know on Facebook, there are, even just in Westchester, New York, where I am, there are many many support groups for families, but some are diagnosis specific, some are just general, like special kids, parents of special kids. And I know a lot of parents connect on there to ask for help. As far as the epidemic is concerned, if your child has existing therapies, still continue to reach out to a therapist. That way we can support you as best as we can. I mean, my dining room table has now become my treatment room, and I'm just trying as best as I can to give parents ideas of what to do with their kids at home that I treat personally. But if you have a child that isn't diagnosed yet, or you're having concerns, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm sure you could still call and make some sort of appointment. That way, once you're able to visit your doctor, that way you can get in, because I know that there's wait lists everywhere, and that's one of the downfalls. I know we typically recommend developmental pediatricians because they look at things more holistically, that in my experience. Just trying to think what else.
A question about that. How do you find a developmental pediatrician? Because I've never heard that.
Google.
Google it? So that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's an actual thing.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
I know.
I did not know that.
So we often will refer out to a developmental pediatrician as opposed to a standard pediatrician because they're more in depth and they look at the whole as a part to its pieces. And generally those developmental pediatricians will stick with the child for longer and can give you more feedback. So we try and go through a developmental pediatrician when possible.
Yeah. There are tied to my clinic. I have a per diem job too, and there are multiple that are tied to our clinic. And I know even in the Bronx, I think it's Montefiore, you just look up like Bronx developmental pediatricians, a whole list will come up of some that are specific to that hospital.
It's a real thing. We're not making it up.
No, I believe you. Yeah. I believe you. See, that's the thing about these conversations and about your book. I mean, I've learned after going through this. So my older child is 24. You would think after 24 years of going through this that I would have learned this stuff. There's just so much. And as a parent, it's so hard. And a lot of it isn't available to you, that this is really helpful.
Yeah.
So Alex, is it different in North Carolina where you are? Are you seeing a difference as far as remote support, or what you would tell a parent right now about getting their child support?
The first thing I would say is in North Carolina, every county is different. So I am giving teletherapy and different versions of therapy. We did get a little bit of flex in the way that we chose to address our services, because I have a caseload right now that has some significant delays, and they're not really appropriate from my professional opinion for a traditional teletherapy appointment. So I've kind of addressed it in different ways by doorstep dropping like packets and activities and things like that.
Wow.
Because it's more conducive and I can consult with the parent and really educate the parent. And that's been a little bit of a win.
Yeah.
For what's happening right now is I've had more contact with my parents now than I have all year.
Same.
Because they are with their kids more, and I've had to make appointments and tell them I'm dropping things, and they're asking for opinions and feedback, and I'm getting to learn what they're doing at home, like skills that they're carrying over, skills that they're not. So on the upside, that's really been a nice side effect of this. My biggest thing right now, parents are trying to find resources for at home. There are some phenomenal websites out there, beyond the book, because the book really gives a lot of activities that we tried to make home friendly, and that was kind of our drive, was to make it as friendly for parents as possible. So we had a lot of like home things that you can do with kids, like stuff in your kitchen or like stuff in your bathroom that you would have, or like those kinds of things. So like we really tried to go that route. I mean, I went to the dollar store and bought some stuff for my kids that I'm dropping off just because it's easy and it's stuff that really works. They actually have like a lot of resources if you know what you're looking for. I mean, tongs and pincers of all kind are really your best friend at home.
The kitchen section at the dollar store.
Yeah, the dollar store. When you go to the dollar store to shop, usually we would go and we just like random trips to the dollar store because you can find a lot there that you don't really think about. And I think we really tried to do that in the book, is provide some home, like really easy stuff that you kind of don't think about in each of the areas to try and work on these things with kids.
You mentioned a moment ago that there are some websites that you've been directing people to. Are there any in particular that you could share?
So the OT one that we use a lot is Tools to Grow. There's a lot of worksheets on there and skills on there. The OT Toolbox is another one that I've used. They're actually on Facebook. And those are the two big ones that we are using right now for what I use. And then we're both SOS certified in feeding, so we utilize the SOS website a lot for like just feeding dynamic, feeding mentality, how to address those things, like easy things, food play. And honestly, Pinterest is your best friend as a parent. There are so many like food play activities on Pinterest.
Oh, cool.
And, like fine motor activities. If you just search for those things, there's literally bundles of it. Yeah. So there you go.
Excellent. I have those in my kitchen.
There you go.
This was a soup container from a Chinese restaurant. When you cut a hole in it. Kids can put pom-poms. They can put dry pasta in there. It doesn't have to be
coins, anything.
Empty out your change jar. It doesn't have to be anything crazy to spend money on. But,
very cool. So one last question for you guys that I know you've heard a bunch. Will you write another book?
So we've talked about it. We're getting asked if we're going to write the 3 to 5 version, and we have talked about the possibility of likely doing so because we know that there's still a gap between when they go to kindergarten. We're just addressing how to go about it because the milestones become a bit farther apart and a bit more, I wouldn't want to say convoluted, but kind of convoluted because they've really built on the ones previous. But we have talked about it.
Just wait till she moves back here. To make this one, I was living in North Carolina at the time, and we spent like 3 days at a coffee shop
and wrote the whole thing.
Wow!
The whole thing. And
wow!
She'll be moving back here soon, so hopefully it'll be
good. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed because I think this is wonderful. I want to just since we're running out of time here, I just want to put up your contact information really quickly. First, this is Alex's email address, and this will be available on this live stream. You'll be able to look at it afterwards, so you don't have to worry about writing everything down really quickly now. And we will have an ASL interpretive version that's up in the next 2 days. Here's Meg's email address as well. If you have specific questions for them, they've been gracious enough to offer to have, if you have questions, you can reach out to them directly. I also want to say where you can get their book. You can get it in either hard copy or electronic download. I actually got the electronic download because at this point in time, I don't particularly want anything mailed to my house because I have to disinfect it, and, you know. So I just did the electronic version, which has been great. I can print out the pages that I can use then for the checklist and to take with me to the doctors. So I thought the electronic version was tremendous. And it's on the Two Sparrows website. If you go to twosparrowssl.com and then you search on the book milestone checklist, it comes up. Or if you go to the 3rd page on their product offerings, it's there. It was hard to put the whole URL for it here, but we will make it available afterward so that when this is posted, the actual URL to go directly to your book will also be there as well. So I recommend it strongly. I recommend it strongly even to parents who, you know, maybe your child is past that age. I've found it really interesting and helpful just in understanding how I can help other people, how I can talk to other parents about this and what's available to them. I do also want to say that next week we're going to have Camille Crayton here. She is also an occupational therapist working in a preschool in New York City, and she's going to talk specifically about remote therapy and how that looks. You mentioned it a little bit, Meg, you know, what works, what doesn't work, how you can support the parents in this process, how parents can support their kids in this process. But thank you both for being here today. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties that we had, but this is such an important topic. And wow, if there's anything that I can do or the Pumpkin Fets can do in supporting parents and getting their kids assessed and access to early intervention, we would really love to do that. So thank you both very much. Stay well, stay safe.
Yes.
And we'll talk to you both soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.